Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They'd advertise, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog, to tell one's name the livelong June to an admiring bog.
And that's Monty Belmonte reciting Emily Dickinson. In no small part because this is National Poetry Month. We are live from the Emily Dickinson Museum in Amherst, where they just reopened the evergreens and are about to embark on their spring hours, so you have more time to wander and bask in the history here.
We have for you today a mix of contemporary poets sharing their work with you and with us in this sacred space for poetry in Western Massachusetts and beyond. Most of the poets who are here with us today have participated in the museum's reading and streaming platform Phosphorescence, and because of the pandemic and various other sundry issues of remodeling and restoring, we haven't all met together in person in this wonderful space right across the street from where I first moved to the Valley here on Main Street in Amherst. But we are joined by the executive director of the museum, the Emily Dickinson Museum, Jane Wald, as well as by Brooke Steinhauser, the senior programs director. Thank you for inviting us to the home that you care for.
Thank you and welcome.
We got a nice little tour earlier to see the difference between where we are now and what you've newly reopened across the way. So let's start with you, Jane. Where are we now?
Right now we are in Emily Dickinson's own home. The homestead, it was built in 1813 by her own grandfather. She lived here for nearly all of her life. This is where she composed almost all of the nearly 1,800 poems that we know today.
People... Such a large number.
It is.
Yeah.
to have as your catalog.
And, people think of, and I know we're going to try to dispel this to a certain extent, of Emily Dickinson as a recluse. So if she didn't write all of her poems here, where did she write the rest of them?
Yeah, well, she had different places where she could be walking out in through the woods or across the meadows.
Oh, I see. But it was still generally near here. It wasn't
generally
in Ecuador.
Near. No. She lived in Amherst. All of her life. So her scenes of writing may be scattered about through the neighborhood. Different spaces in the house. I think she used her imagination wherever she was to think about her themes, certain phrases that might come to mind. She'd jot them down and bring them back and then work on them, polish them right here in the homestead.
We got to see her bedroom, but what is the room that we are currently in? What did this room used to be?
Yeah, we're in a wing of the house that's not part of the original house, but was built probably about 30 years later. This space we're in, we believe, was her parents' bedroom when they lived in this house after 1855. They moved away for a little bit of time, came back in 1855, and we think this is where the parents' room was.
So Emily Dickinson may have conceived her poems in the bedroom, but we are where Emily Dickinson may have been conceived.
No, the before. No.
No? The timeline is wrong?
No.
It's not how time works.
Good thinking. But,
I thought this was the birthplace of poetry right here.
Oh, no.
Jane Wald, who is the executive director of the Emily Dickinson Museum. We're also joined by the senior program director, Brooke Steinhauser. And we have been reeling since yesterday, where Khalees and I went to New Haven, Vermont. And despite all the things you'll hear on tomorrow's show about the trials and tribulations that we experienced, we did experience a total eclipse of the sun. And now
we learned from Salman Hamid that Emily Dickinson was pretty much adjacent to somebody who was very invested in eclipses. However successful they were not, because they were not particularly successful. But Emily Dickinson does have a couple of eclipse poems.
She does, yeah. She there's a wonderful alternate verse of one of her poems that contains reference to an eclipse. But this is a poem that is really all about what we saw yesterday. So would you like me to read it?
Yes,
okay.
please.
All right. Oh, it's hard to read Emily Dickinson poems, isn't it?
I did it.
All right, we can do this.
Are you setting the standard?
No, I'm not setting the standard. I lowered the bar to make it easy for anyone else to do it.
Thank you, Monty. I really appreciate
Feel
it.
comfortable. Feel free.
But you read an easier poem.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows the one I read.
Yeah. Sunset at night is natural, but sunset on the dawn reverses nature, master. So midnight's dew at noon, eclipses be predicted, and science bows them in. But do one face us suddenly, Jehovah's watch is wrong.
That's what it felt like. You could see, like, I'm ready to throw this baby into this volcano because the sun shut off in the middle of the day today.
Right?
Like, oh gosh, everything has forsaken us. What did we do?
Yeah.
I feel like she's playing with the idea of like, okay, we can predict eclipses. We've got the science, but if one should happen that we couldn't predict, that's sort of nature's triumph over us. I don't know. There's Jehovah's watch, this time piece that's ticking somewhere, and it's wrong.
Yeah. And it certainly felt like that with the total eclipse yesterday. But we were alluding to, when we talked to our Hampshire College-based astronomer, that there was an Amherst College astronomer right across the street from here, connected to the family of Emily Dickenson, connected even more so to the house that has just reopened that we got a tour of. Can you tell us a little bit about that story? Either, Jane, do you know that story?
Well, yeah. So the astronomer was David Todd, who was married to Mabel Loomis. Mabel Loomis is well known for having a sort of long-running affair with Emily Dickinson's brother, Austin. So the Todds came to town in the early 1880s. Austin Dickinson was David Todd's boss. David Todd, of course, ran all over the world chasing the eclipse and really didn't. It was, as Brooke said, not so
It
successful.
was cloudy every eclipse he went to go see, despite the
right.
fact he globe-trotted in the 19th century to go find them.
Imagine sailing a boat to northern Japan, weeks and weeks, and thousands of dollars only to see a cloudy day.
Yeah. It makes my failed alternator pale in comparison.
Yeah, so the real achievement of that trip was that Mabel Todd was one of the first Caucasian women to climb Mount Fuji.
Oh, wow.
Because, well,
What else is she going to do?
I know, yeah. It was cloudy. Why not just go out and climb a mountain?
And she's fascinating because that's, she manages to take what is ultimately her husband's professional failures and turn them into something really great for herself. She writes books about these journeys. She has these, she gets to climb Mount Fuji and write about it. She speaks all over the country about these experiences. She collects artifacts from the Ainu people in Japan and on behalf of the Peabody Essex Museum. And so she's a wily figure, Mabel.
Yeah, she's pretty much a live wire. And of course, for the Emily Dickinson story, she becomes the first editor of Dickinson's poetry after her death.
We are at the Emily Dickinson Museum in Amherst, and we're speaking with the executive director of the museum, Jane Wald, as well as the senior programs director, Brooke Steinhauser, and we're still reeling from the eclipse, so that's why we've had such a eclipse tangent, but a nice tie-in for what's been going on here. And the preservation of Emily Dickinson's works ultimately has led to the preservation of Emily Dickinson's home and the aforementioned brother's home. So tell us, when I moved here 20 plus years ago and lived right across the street, I could see the sign that said this was Emily Dickinson's house. But even though I could have walked across the street to come here, there wasn't a lot of things that were open to the public at that time. Tell us about how this place became a museum that is now open to the public, because you've been here for those 20 years, right, Jane?
Yeah, I've been here, 23 years. The Dickinson homestead has been open to, it has represented Emily Dickinson's legacy since, Amherst College bought it in 1965. And gradually over the decades, its open schedule expanded from Tuesday afternoons by appointment.
Not the most welcoming of museums.
to 5 or 6 days a week. And so we are now open 5 days a week during the spring and fall, 6 days a week Tuesday through Sunday during the summer, and through October, which is a kind of a favorite season to travel in New England. So we have guided tours each of those days of the homestead and of the Evergreens. And the Evergreens has been closed since before the pandemic to undertake some really important preservation measures. And these measures were really directed at improving the interior environment for collections objects. So the Emily Dickinson Museum is the repository of the furnishings of the homestead that had been left after Emily Dickinson's death, moved over to the Evergreens when the homestead was sold.
Because the Evergreens stayed in the Dickinson households.
That's right. It was owned by Dickinson family members and their heirs until 1988. Mm-hmm. So it had basically 2 households worth of furniture. It was just packed to the gills. Those who lived in the house after Austin and Susan's daughter, Martha, died in the 1940s. They just arranged themselves around the Dickinson furnishings for the next, 45 years.
Climbing over antique sofas.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
like Twister with Emily Dickinson's furniture in here.
Kind of, yeah. So you might go into the parlor over there and you'd see a stack of, say, Atlantic Monthlies next to a People magazine. It was that kind of.
Yeah, they don't call it hoarding if it was from Emily Dickinson.
No, you call it collecting in that case. Carefully curating in that case.
With 2 households full of items, are you still discovering new things to bring out and build displays around to bring to the public?
Oh, definitely, yes. During this same period, while we were doing this preservation project, we were also cataloging this 8,000 or 9,000 object collection for the very first time. So this was really the first time we'd been able to go through all the boxes, all the furniture, all the artwork, all the kitchen equipment and dining equipment and, everything. So we started this project thinking we had about 8,000 objects, and, it turns out we have much more than that. And
it's not hoarding.
It's not
hoarding.
Historical collection.
Yeah, right. So we are now really just at the point of being able to tap into all of these objects that have had to be sort of boxed away, sort of a hidden collection for so many years. And now this gives us terrific opportunity to bring these objects out, furnish the houses, to create exhibits, to figure out research projects. There's just a huge potential for this, and that's a thrill.
That collection has now been digitized, so we have a digital database that if you're listening at home and you want to explore some of that hoard/collection, you can go to our website and visit that database. And there's a really cool randomize button where you can just pull up an assortment of objects that belong to these 2 families and explore there.
That's Brooke Steinhauser, who's the Senior Programs Director here at the Emily Dickinson Museum. You were telling us a pretty cool story, and then we talked about how this house was sold into a different family. The Evergreens stayed in the Dickinson family, and it became a repository for Dickinson family stuff, that their old stuff gets brought back over here frequently, including the front door of the home we're in right now, Emily Dickinson's front door. Tell us that story.
Yeah, well, the front door was part of this latest restoration at the homestead. So the front entrance to the house had changed a bit in the 50 years that it was owned by the family that moved in after the Dickinsons. They made some other changes to this site as well. There were some outbuildings that were not in great shape, and they took them down, but they were preservation minded. They saved pieces of things that they took down, such as the big Dickinson barn that stood out back, and the conservatory that was on the front of the house, which we've since reconstructed. And they constructed a garage, a more modern garage, partially out of some of those same pieces of that they had taken down from other buildings. So that means when we go to reconstruct something like the conservatory, we were able to take the sash right out of the garage and put them right back into the conservatory. And in the case of the front door, that had been the original front door from Dickinson's lifetime had been stored in a loft in that garage. And the restoration is just beautiful of that door. Now you can enter Emily's home the way she might have.
That's pretty great. We also have been hearing about the reopening of the Evergreens and the mission of how you are restoring or preserving that house versus what's gone on here. Tell us what's happening at the Evergreens right now. Jane Wald, the executive director of the Emily Dickinson Museum.
Yes, so I mentioned this preservation project we just completed, and that really was all about improving just the sort of the air quality and the environment, keeping temperature and humidity within a certain range. Okay, so that's kind of maybe a little the nerdy part.
Yeah. Also replaced all the knob and tube wiring from when that used to be your office, and much safer in there now, right?
Oh yeah, 20 years ago that was my office, and yes, it is much safer. And all right, frankly, it smells better. So what's going on in there now is we get a lot more sort of air circulation, the environmental control we want. But now, exciting next steps. We have spent probably more than 20 years trying to improve what we call the infrastructure, so it's like the systems and, keeping water out of the basement and all of those things that you're not even supposed to see. Mm-hmm. And now we had a big long list that we had to get through, and now we've gotten through it. So that's pretty exciting.
You were nerding out, Brooke, about wallpaper.
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah, tell us how that became fun.
Well,
I hate wallpaper, and I hate putting it up, and I hate taking it down. But the fact that you were so excited about it, I was like, okay, do tell.
I think we have something like over 100 different wallpapers that are known to exist between the two houses. Mm-hmm. This is obviously a period where you are wallpapering your interiors.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of different wallpaper.
That implies that there's different wallpaper in every room.
Yes.
For a house that has a lot of rooms.
Yes, and then also a lot of periods of redecoration, right? We got to keep up with the changing times and styles.
Right, multiple episodes.
Multiple episodes. So wallpaper conservation is a big part of what's going to be happening next at the Evergreens, and we're excited because unlike this most recent chapter where we did need to close in order to do all of that work, we're going to stay open, and when visitors come, they can see the wallpaper conservation happening in real time. So sometimes wallpaper conservation means removing that wallpaper from the wall if possible for preservation back at the studio for cleaning, and then reapplying it. That was the case for some wallpaper on the second floor of the Evergreens, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jane, but I think as part of that process, there was a discovery of even more wallpaper behind that paper that we didn't know about.
Yeah, that's
Classic.
right. Unfortunately, so sometimes in these old houses, people will put wallpaper on top of wallpaper.
I mean, the people do that in new houses.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Shingles on top of shingles on the roof.
Yeah, but
whatever, we'll just cover it. It's fine.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Dickinsons over at the Evergreens most commonly ripped off all the old wallpaper, so, that's great for them, too bad for us. But so the difference between what we're doing at the Evergreens and what we're doing at the Homestead is that the Evergreen still has wallpapers on the wall from when the Dickinsons lived there. So we've got that incredible authenticity at the Evergreens. Unfortunately, it's a little tattered in places and a little dirty from soot. So we've got to go through each room, do a little plaster repair where that's needed, and then clean and conserve the wallpaper. So and we're going to do this while we're open, as Brooke said, so that visitors can see this process unfold. And what we're going to end up with is I guess sort of a preserved, / repaired decor and canvas and setting that the Dickinson family actually lived in. At the Homestead, there's been so little of that decor that survived the first half of the 20th century that we're needing to reconstruct it. We need to reproduce it based on physical evidence and fragments of wallpaper that we find. So things are going to look fresher, still authentic, but fresher, newer at the homestead, and at the Evergreens, it's going to be a 19th century environment.
And Brooke, you were saying that the Apple TV show has been helpful in this, in the Emily Dickinson household?
Particularly with some helping to fill some of the holes in our collection when it comes to furnishing the rooms of these houses. So we do have a really wonderful collection, those 12,000 objects that we were talking about. But we do also have this terrific piece of research that is a furnishings plan that talks about how to present these rooms for our period of significance when Emily Dickinson is alive and writing. And in some cases, we may not have that object that is referred to in that memoir by Martha Dickinson Bianchi, because for some reason it didn't come back to this collection. So that's where Apple TV, which was very thoughtful in its acquisition process, purchased. They went to what's the big fair?
Oh, Brimfield.
They went to Brimfield and they purchased antiques there that were made in New England. So they essentially did the same thing that we would be doing to acquire, objects to fill those gaps. Yeah.
That's Brooke Steinhauser, the Senior Programs Director, and Jane Wald, the Executive Director of the Emily Dickinson Museum, from where we are broadcasting right now. So we don't get accused of watching paint dry on the radio and talking about wallpaper drying and things like that. We'll take a short break and we'll hear some real poetry from contemporary poets in the home of Emily Dickinson, one of the nation's most famous poets.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
We're live from the Emily Dickinson Museum in Amherst. Would you like to introduce our first poet?
No.
All right.
You do it.
Nicole Young Martin is a performer, poet, playwright, director, event producer, curator, and nonprofit professional. Nicole has worked across various disciplines, including theater, poetry, and classical music. Originally from Detroit, Michigan, Nicole currently lives in Northern Connecticut, but made a beeline to get here for this broadcast at the Emily Dickinson Museum, despite the fact that we poorly communicated that it was not at the NEPM studios, probably 5 minutes from where you are.
Yeah,
but here in
20 minutes from where you actually live.
But thank you so much for joining us here.
We are also joined by Erica Charis-Moling. Who is the director of mass poetry, a poet, educator, and librarian. Her writing has been published in numerous literary journals and one anthology. Her poems have been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and Orathon Anthology. She currently serves as co-editor-in-chief of Solstice Literary Magazine and lives in Western Massachusetts with her wife, daughter, and fur babies.
Abigail Chibitnoy is the author of several books of poetry, is an assistant professor at UMass Amherst, and is a mentor for the Institute of American Indian Arts MFA in creative writing. She is correct me when I say these wrong, Koniag descendant?
That one's the easy one.
Okay. And member of the Tangaranak Tanihanak Native Village in Kodiak. Thank you all three so much for joining us today. Let's start out with a poem. We're talking about poems. We've heard a couple of Emily Dickinson poems. Let's hear one of your poems, Nicole.
I'm going to read to you, and thanks so much, Monty and Khalees, for having me on today. I'm going to read Wait Like Her, which was inspired by a painting by my dear friend Ella Nathaniel Alkowitz, who's also based in Western Mass. It's a painting called Graceful Gray. Gray clouds come once at dawn, right on time, as she sat near our shoreline, waiting for a comforting breeze to arrive. Once blue like our sky, our oceans gleamed of wisdom, dreaming in indigo, bathed in good fortune, yielding sooner than her slated invitation. We throw stones that hit rock bottom like a hunter's bow. She skipped stones at the water's edge like the day's breeze would deliver once as cordial gifts, those she knew would yet to return. For land and sea have become shallow like the bulk of a world's lone souls. Have we become too busy to care for her? Gray currents still remain unscathed, warranted like sapphires, the edible like currants, due to savor like acid, the enveloped in innate sweeping beauty. May we too wait like her. May we never again gamble with her splendor.
That is poet Nicole Young Martin, who joins us live from the Emily Dickinson Museum here in Amherst.
I do want to ask you about starting Black Writers Read, because I know it was a COVID project, but when I saw you putting it together, I was like, yes. Because especially during the pandemic, I didn't have as much opportunity to go out and seek new BIPOC writers I wasn't like directly connected to. So did you only put it together because of the pandemic, or was it something that you've been looking to do and looking to foster? And also, you'll have to explain what the project is, because I did not.
Yes.
Black Writers Read.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about my virtual platform, because I'm looking for every opportunity to promote it. I first want to shout out, because I am not the only one in the game.
Right.
There's Black and Published podcast, there's Black Writers Studio, and there's several others that emerged around the time of the pandemic lockdown in 2020. Black Writers Read originally was supposed to be a one-night event. I hate that I have to mention this name, but it emerged during the He Who Shall Not Be Named 45 was going to be hosting a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma on Juneteenth. And for folks who are very aware of your history, you know that is extremely troublesome. So on Facebook, a week before, I got tagged, because people know me in Western Mass, because I do a lot of work here, even though I live in Northern Connecticut. They know me as a local artist activist, and people tag me, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I was like, I can't leave my house. I can't go anywhere. And I'm an event producer, so I know how to do that thing, but I don't know how to do that thing virtually. And so I was like, okay, what can I put together in a week where people don't have to leave their homes? And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do Black Writers Read. And so I was able to convene 16 writers from across the country. As far as Seattle and Baltimore, we read over a 3.5-hour period streamed on Facebook and YouTube. And then from there, people are like, I wanted to be a part of it, but I didn't get a chance to sign up. Okay. So we did, we hosted an author one author a month. And then it just grew and grew and grew and grew. And now I have literary publicists, literary agents tapping me to have the writers on. We've expanded beyond YouTube and Facebook. We're now also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music and such, and Google Podcast. And we now have about 3 to 4 authors on a month from September to June. We're now in the middle of season 4.
That's so great. That's poet Nicole Young Martin, who joins us here live from the Emily Dickenson Museum. We're going to get another poem in shortly. Let's move to our second poet who joins us today, Erica Charis Moling. You are a poet, educator, and librarian, and you've been nominated for all sorts of different prizes, and you are with the group Mass Poetry. Is that...
As you were reading the bio, I was like, oh, shoot, I should have sent an updated bio.
Well, now we've given everyone your history.
We can update it live.
Yes. I was their education director. In recent history, but not contemporarily. Contemporarily, I'm the director of a library at a community college in Northern Connecticut, so I made the same drive
Oh, okay.
that our friend here made.
Maybe you can carpool home.
Well, there you go.
Okay.
You wanna ride? But yeah, so that's what I'm currently doing. But before that, I was at Mass Poetry, and my job was basically to connect schools and poets, which was awesome. I loved every minute of that. And then, of course, Mass Poetry has a big festival, so I was a part of planning that as well.
Well, let's hear a poem from one of our poets here at the Emily Dickenson Museum today, Erica Charis Moling.
I'm going to start with a poem called The Difference Between a Field and a Meadow, which comes from my chapbook, How We Burn, which, just for context, is a semi-autobiographical chapbook about coming out later in life and trying to reconcile the evangelical faith that I was in at the same time. The difference between a field and a meadow, the sign tells us, is diversity. No suburban rows of plant development here, not the same shapes stretching like planned agrarian condo communities as we drove the many miles past fields of almond and apricot, endless lines of precise grapevines, and the pump jacks nodding heavy heads in time through California's hypnotic Central Valley, until we arrived at our home for a night, our unknown host, welcomed us from every wall and pillow with nearly identical Christian sentiments, cultivated and displays in regular rows. God is love. You are loved, the embroidery says. Consider the lilies of the field. And I do, deciding he must have meant meadow, unless he was walking in a greenhouse with blooms grown only to be cut, and Jesus was making some point about high margin yields and pragmatic hands more than the miracle of meadow. Below Yosemite's cliffs, at the foot of its highest waterfall, we stand by a stretch of green that when passed at 25 miles an hour just looks like grass. To my suburban eyes, a chore. But to other, these blades are food, shelter, or baskets, deer grass, being what Awanichi tribes prized for their weaving. Their preference tended not by plows, but by fire. The same flames we're told sequoias need to open their cones, the seeds only unlocked by tongues that hollow their hulking trunks with burns so large I could stand inside without bowing my head. I bent my forehead to bark and said, "Thank you," though I don't speak the electric tongue of trees whose roots we now know are not dumb, but are abuzz with warning or comfort or the gospel of rain. No sign of clouds in the sky today, or maybe there's a message I miss as I read that not many places have the right mix of soil, frequency of fire, or water to cultivate what to us seems wild. The grass of the field, which today is, and tomorrow is cast into the oven. And he must have meant me, the unnameable blades that have thrived in my life that I burned to the ground, fire held fast by my own shaking hand, hesitant while chiding gospel scold, "O you of little faith." How many ways can a life rise from its ashes, I wonder? And the words of Mark affirm, a meadow accepts itself as various. I look to the sky for a sign, some cloud in the shape of a need I cannot name. I test the wind with my tongue as a torch song burns my lips, smoke filling my chest with a longing as I bow to the ground.
That is poet Erica Cheris Moling, who joins us live at the Emily Dickenson Museum. It feels like you should clap when people do poems. I mean, we clap when people come and play live music in the
You
studio.
snap for poems. You snap.
I want to clap.
Okay, well, fine.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you about bringing poetry to young folks because it always, I think of the meme where they're like, don't let your kids get into poetry, then they'll start wearing black and hanging out in corners.
Snapping instead
Wearing
of clapping.
beatnik hats, yeah.
Right. But I also feel like there is a certain beauty in understanding your place in the words that you have and making them coincide. And not so much I want to know if you saw that happen with the program, but like what was the reception like from either side when you brought these two worlds together and tried to make them commingle?
Oh my gosh, it was magic. It's amazing what happens. I mean, even with older kids that are trying to play it cool, when a poet walks in and shares their voice and their heart in a way that those students feel, it opens up even the hardest shell. It's unreal. And it's fascinating to me because it even happened cross-lingually. So as the education director, I was also the backup poet for any program that we did. So any poet that pulled out 5 minutes before, I was on, which is how I taught my first class of sixth graders. But I ended up in a school in East Boston where most of the kids spoke Spanish. And they were supposed to have a Spanish-speaking poet that day. And it didn't happen that way, and here I was, and I'm like, all right, well, y'all are going to hear some gay poems in English. And even though I'm fairly convinced that some of and they were young, they were like, I want to say second or third graders, they were little. So I don't know how much they, like word for word, phrase for phrase, understood, but the energy in that room, their eyes just lit up. And I was told that for the next week, that was all they wanted to do. They didn't want to color. They didn't want to learn to add. They wanted to write poems.
That's amazing.
Which is just incredible, right? So it was so powerful to be able to coordinate a program like that.
That is poet Erica Cheris Moling. We are live at the Emily Dickenson Museum, and I'll remind you, you're listening to the Fabulous 413 here on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, offering solar options, energy security, and solutions for the local community. Learn more at northeast-solar.com.
We have a third poet with us here in these hallowed halls where Emily Dickenson once walked on Main Street in Amherst. And that poet is Abigail Chibitnoy, who we introduced earlier, but is an assistant professor at UMass and is a mentor for the Institute of American Indian Arts MFA in creative writing. Thank you for coming down the street to Emily Dickinson's house to join us for this today.
Koyana, thank you. I had a bit of a shorter drive just over the hill from South Hadley.
Let's hear one of your poems.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. I think it's fitting to be in the home of Emily Dickinson's house to read the first poem from my second collection, which in part attempts to entertain a question I received in response. My first collection, How to Dress a Fish, largely interrogated my family's history and experience of the boarding school era of American history through male ancestors, because that's where the records were. And a reader once asked, where were the women in this story? And I didn't have an answer in the records, so the second book really attempts to find that voice. And so I will just start with the opening untitled poem of this collection, which is titled In the Current Where Drowning is Beautiful. I am looking for a way to sound the women catch in my throat, water, lung. How do you say the women are at the beach? Wave after wave, standing on shore still. The water now to our throats, looking for a wave send where otherwise a field fallows. Listen, they cut my fingers, fin, fine, finnay. My neck gills slit so I too could breathe, and became aware another tongue carried in my throat. There was earth at the bottom, so I dug. There was a sea and a knife and a sacrifice. And looking back, I drank salt and all the words I am learning.
That's poet Abigail Chibitnoy, who joins us here at the Emily Dickinson Museum. Yeah, I like the snapping.
See? See?
I'm into it now. I've come around.
You're like that bully on the back of the class who doesn't want to participate but really wants to participate.
Yeah, then you do it and you're like, I should have done it all along.
I should have done it all
Yeah.
along. See?
I'm not a very good snapper. That's what it comes down to.
That's okay. So in your work with Indigenous poetry, I was looking at some of your other work. Took one in particular. I'm definitely mispronouncing that, and apologies. But I've always found it interesting in poetry that uses other languages when they don't translate necessarily, like in line. And do you feel like there's an importance to leaving that weight of language and that connection to the original culture in your work? And is that something that you try to foster with people who are in your program?
It's a great question, and I think it's kind of an ongoing one that drives different poems differently. I started in my first book working with lines from my community's language resources online, and so on one hand, the decision not to include direct line translations was easy because I knew the diligent reader could look them up, and it would also drive them to this great cultural resource where they might also fall down a rabbit hole of cultural wonder. In the second collection, I was starting to learn my language and forming my own sentences and utterances, and you could no longer do that. Google Translate does not currently work for Suktun, which is the Alutiiq language of the Kodiak Archipelago. And I had this moment of kind of questioning, what is it to translate that work? If you know the language, there's the redundancy and the kind of patronizing reminder. And there's also, of course, the politics of assimilation and boarding schools and how hard and how much I've had to deliberately work to reclaim that language. And so for me, how I drive my students to the question becomes about what the gesture is, what the intention is, how you're coming to the language and to the poem, and what you want to share with your reader. And so I don't want to ostracize readers who aren't of that background, but I also want to gesture at that kind of reverse privileging of knowledge, right? The same way that I can read a poem, I can read the Cantos, I can read Ezra Pound, and I can see Latin and French and however many other languages, and they're not translated on the page, and they're not even signaled for what they are. So they assume a certain education and a certain tradition of knowledge that is privileged. And so I did want to do that as well. But in a sort of compromise mode, I also have footnotes that are poetic translations of the literal translation, which I think really drives to me the heart of poetry and what it is to hear a phrase that you don't know the literal meaning to, but you can get that energy, right? Even if you don't know the words, the energy. And so it becomes a conversation, and becomes an invitation of other voices into the room. And so the way I arrived at that understanding of what I'm doing, that's more what I push my students to think through. Where do you want to arrive? Don't just take my answers. Don't just take how I've decided to do this work. What do you want to do with your poems, and who are you speaking to?
That is poet Abigail Chibitnoy, who is an associate professor right up the street at UMass Amherst.
Hopefully someday, but just an assistant professor at the moment.
Oh, all of these nuances of these titles, it drives me nuts, frankly. Why can't we just call you professor and leave it at that? Let's take our last mini break here and then rapid fire another poem from each of our three poets here, because I want to make sure we get to hear their voice one more time in the home of Emily Dickenson. A reminder that you're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM. Yes, we are at the Emily Dickenson Museum, and we are speaking with several people who have associations with that underwriter right there, UMass Amherst. And we're joined in this hallowed ground for one of America's most famous poets by contemporary working poets. Nicole, can we hear another one of your poems? Nicole Young Martin.
Yes, I'll read at the end of it all. Tomorrow there might be something. Next week there might be nothing. Next year you might be somewhere. Yesterday, was there really anything? Tonight we could be anywhere. Within hours we won't be here. Within minutes we will be sure. Within days, tomorrow will be here. Next week will be here. Next year will be here. But just yesterday, there was really something. This minute be here, tonight be somewhere, today be someone.
Ooh, I love that one. Especially because yesterday was something big.
Yes, very big.
I kept saying that, and I was like, I've never seen anything like this in my entire life. It's a big deal. That's Nicole Young Martin. What's your relationship to Emily Dickenson as a contemporary working poet right now?
That was the question I was going to ask.
The next poet.
The musings of daily life and how she, at least from my understanding, like how she wrote meticulously throughout her life in different spaces, taking note of where she was and just being present in where she is. There's a lot that I really not only admire about her writing, but also admire about her person, because there's a lot that I'm going through right now, being very candid, like mentally and health-wise, that she was at this particular age. So I relate to her a lot. I also want to note that the Emily Dickenson Museum tour is one of my favorite tours, and also a favorite tour of many people that I know. When they come to visit, they're like, we have to go to the Emily Dickenson Museum because the docents here are like none other. So,
oh, wow, that's so great.
Yeah.
That's poet Nicole Young Martin. Let's hear another poem from one of our other contemporary poets here at the Emily Dickenson Museum today, Erica Cherismoling.
So the next poem I'm going to read for you is from a new series that I've been writing in response to a group of black and white photographs that were found in my grandmother's house, all of which were unlabeled or poorly labeled. And so we don't know the backstory, so I've been inventing them.
Oh, I love it.
This one's called Fish Hatchery, Dead River, 1949. Somewhere out of sight, some wiggling thing is working its way into the world, fighting for food or hiding in gravel, tiny trout, trying to beat the odds in tanks tucked behind the photo's little white house, or maybe inside the long barn-shaped building in front of it. At the top of the road that runs along both buildings, a stream winding its way on the other side through the center of the frame, and a white dress facing away from me in the foreground, her forearms supporting another wiggling thing, tiny toddler, trying to work out the words for all he sees in the face hidden from me. Beside his grainy image, I hold the profile of my 27-week ultrasound, my tiny wiggling thing, comparing the black and white contours of noses and chins. The resemblance swims in and out of view, darting out of sight the harder I stare. What would the woman, his mother, his aunt, say to me, a lesbian mom, carrying my little science miracle? If she turned to look at my face, would she recognize me as family or freak? So many spawning questions in the churning tanks of my mind, while down in my belly, I feel the wheeling motions of a child already learning to swim upstream.
Ooh. Nothing relevant about that poem at all. Erica Chera Smoling, who joins us here at the Emily Dickinson Museum. What's your relationship to Emily Dickinson?
Well, so she was one of the handful of poets I, quote unquote, discovered as a teenager, alongside Sylvia Plath and Walt Whitman and a few others, who really sort of captured my imagination. And I don't think it went much further than that, except that I also have a music background. My undergrad is in classical vocal performance. So her musicality, I think, was what snagged me at first. But then, of course, I came out in my 30s and wrestled a lot with my evangelical faith and found in her a kindred who, through her own work and in her own way, struggled through some of the same things. And so I didn't come back to her until I was in my late 30s. And then I was like, whoa, how did I miss all this? Or did I? Or did I? Was it in there? I don't know.
That's Erica Chera Smoling, who joins us here at the Emily Dickinson Museum. Let's hear one more poem from our third poet, Abigail Chubitnoy.
Thank you. This is from some newer work that I am currently still trying to navigate through. And in Indigenous studies, there's this concept of survivance, coined by Gerald Visner, the idea that we're not just after surviving, but also thriving. And culture is not a static artifact. It is something that we actively participate in making into the future as well as the past. And so all to say, this is that poem, this is that project that's interested in this idea of how to survive and also thrive. Agdaks 1. My sex, white like my grandmother's before me, accustomed to comfort, wanting more and getting it. It isn't that I don't want to give up, it's just I don't know how to end. When I entered the house, my mother was waiting. We had to leave, she said. I hadn't wanted to turn home. You and I were outside every morning trying to hold up the sky together. My sisters and I, we were taking turns keeping the watch, the water coming out the pipes. We put too much in. I had nothing to give my father. I wasn't prepared for any of it. Water through the floorboards, the weight of so much air. I told you about the deer, but the walrus. In the water, the walrus had too many horns, kept upsetting boats. long-toothed, they are still rocking boats. Does 6 laps of bourbon really keep the devil anyway? I woke last night choking the dry air, sweet red spilling down my throat, and no one dared laugh at that. Oh, well, when it rains it pours sometimes, so they say it goes. They say. Koyana.
Oh, sorry. Abigail Trevitnoy, Nicole Young-Martin, and Erica Cheris-Moling have joined us today. We've just got a minute and a half left, but the museum director here has welcomed us at the Emily Dickinson Museum, Jane Wald. Did you want to close with a Dickinson poem? Is that the rumor that I had heard?
That's what I heard.
That was a
Well, we're not going to put you on the spot then. We're not going to make
heard
it.
the rumor, but I can open this book to
Okay.
almost any page.
Pick a short one.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
So demanding.
Let's see. I will read the part of this one, which is fabulous. I taste a liquor never brewed from tankards scooped in pearl. Not all the Frankfurt berries yield such an alcohol. Inebriate of air am I, and debauchee of dew, reeling through endless summer days from inns of molten blue. When landlords turn the drunken bee out of the foxglove's door, when butterflies renounce their drams, I shall but drink the more, till seraphs swing their snowy hats and saints to windows run to see the little tippler leaning against the sun.
That is the executive director of the Emily Dickinson Museum, Jane Wald. We've also been joined by Brooke Steinhauser, the senior programs director, as well as poets Erica Cheris-Moling, Abigail Trevitnoy, and Nicole Young-Martin. Thank you all so much for welcoming us here to this wonderful place.
This has been wicked cool. Check out their series that they have in the spring and summer. There's all sorts of writers coming here, programs that happen that you can participate in. Thanks to Bart Rankin for engineering for us. I use Suryawan for doing our pictures. I'm Khalees Smith.
I'm Monty Belmonte.
We'll see you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413.
Done.